Thank you for that kind introduction and for what seems to have been an enormous amount of work tracking down people I haven't seen in a while in some instances. So I enjoyed watching that. This is the last newsletter that we put out in the fall of this year, and it's really been a great year. I'm just kidding. It's been a terrible year. We really had a lot of things to navigate together as a society, and I don't just mean as a society, but I don't just mean VESS. I mean as a country, as human beings going through what seemed to be just trial after trial after trial. And I want to really thank the members of our organization for being so hardworking, thoughtful, and generous with their time and effort. This is a picture I took last year in Steamboat Springs with my kids. That's the last time we were all able to get together in one room and talk. And you can see my son over there on the left is now taller than me. And just for reference, here's what they looked like the first time we came. And, you know, one thing I love about this meeting, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the talk, is how we get to know each other's families and see each other outside of the hospital and as human beings. And I think this meeting for our family has become a really valuable time to just reconnect. And, you know, it's interesting to have a meeting where the kids are always asking me every year to make sure I've got an abstract in and kind of trying to keep me on task. So, you know, Audrey and Olivia and Amy, I wish you were here. A lot of you in the audience, you know, we had the nominating committee announcements yesterday. We have the awards ceremonies today, and you might be asking, you know, how did I get up here at this podium, and how can I get involved in VESS and have opportunities like this? And it's a really straightforward list. This is a great organization because it's really easy to get engaged. Please join if you're not a member and you're watching this. We have candidate memberships. We really cater to junior vascular surgeons, residents, and medical students. Submit your science. You know, I tried to tally up how many VESS abstracts I've had since I came here first as a resident. It was actually kind of tricky because the winter and spring meetings go to different journals. But, you know, as the years have gone on, I've really enjoyed attending, and it's way more fun to watch your mentee, your medical student up at the podium, your resident up at the podium, than to be up here yourself. And so for those of you who are at that level and have already presented at VESS as a medical student, you're already way ahead of me in terms of progress. I'd also encourage you to volunteer, and I don't just mean your work, but also your ideas. I think one of the most unique things about VESS that makes us different from some of the other organizations is it's really easy for a member with a good idea to elevate that idea and get support for it and even get credit for it. And over this past year, if you look at all the things we've done as an organization with our guidance about how to do telemedicine visit, and how to, what should we do about elective cases, and where do we stand on, you know, racial and social injustice, and where do we stand on gender equality in our specialty. You know, VESS certainly wasn't the only person involved in this conversation, but we were oftentimes the first to speak up, and I think that sets us apart. And I'll also just say that a lot of those initiatives this year came from the ground up, came from a member demanding that we do it. And then finally, I'd say just mentor, sponsor, and recruit. We need to keep growing our organization. This venue, it's kind of ironic we selected it. It's the first time we're here because we've outgrown many of our other places that we meet, and that's a sign of a healthy organization. So getting back to that first time I came, you know, this was the paper I presented, and I really want to, you know, acknowledge, you know, Marc Passman, who got me to this meeting the first time. And I was in Raul Guzman's lab at Vanderbilt, but and to keep following through with the punchline of Dr. Lee about being from the South, the guy who preceded me in lab was a guy named Jim Bob Falk, and I showed up to get my lab orientation from Jim Bob, and ironically, I'd like to add that Eliason's oldest kid is William Robert, who we used to affectionately call Billy Bob, but that never caught on. Anyway, I've been getting my lab orientation from Jim Bob about how to keep a lab notebook and how to do a Western blot and all these things. And he kind of cut me off at the end. He said, look, the most important thing you need to know is you need to get hold of Passman and find something to do with him because there's this meeting you got to get to. And boy, was he right. So thanks, Marc, for getting me here in the first place. I know I wouldn't be at this podium if he hadn't. And for those of us trying to get here for the first time or trying to figure out their role in the organization, I've got this cartoon up. I got to tell you a story about the first time I came to VESS. I showed up to the meeting. It was at Steamboat Ground, and I'd gotten some advice about what to do and where to be. And so I showed up the first day of the meeting, and I walked in, and I was a little surprised at how small the meeting was. There was about 25 people in the room, and there was some food on the side. And I got my food and sat down at the table, and I noticed everybody was staring at me, and I didn't know anybody in the room. And then I sat through the first two talks, one of which was about renal failure and marathon runners, and I can't remember what the second one was about. And I finally realized that I had sat down in the wrong meeting. I had wandered into a meeting on hypoxia research, and I tried to figure out a way to artfully get up and get out of there without being horribly embarrassed. So that freshman experience is part of coming to a meeting for the first time. And I've got some advice for you the next time we meet if it's the first time you're coming in person. This is Marc Passman's advice to me, and the ones with an asterisk are mine. Don't miss the deadline. You got to get your abstract in to get on the agenda. Do not wear a tie. I think it's funny how straight-laced the surgery world is, and we see a trainee every year who thinks he's being teased or set up for a practical joke by being told not to wear a tie, and we love telling people to take them off. I enjoyed seeing that even in the virtual sessions this meeting. We've had people with ties on. Review and practice your presentation. Take a lesson if you have never gone skiing. That applied to me. Learn how to get off the lift, very important. And my asterisk right there, learn how to get on the lift. That picture to the right is Phil Goodney standing behind me, who always wants to meet up with me for a run because he finds my lack of skiing skill entertaining. Phil's from the New England area. His kids are ski racers. And the very first time we were both at this meeting together, I think we were both, residents or fellows or something. We met up to get on the ski lift, and I actually fell down in the lift line, which was almost as embarrassing as going to the wrong meeting. So that's my final bit of advice, is be sure you're in the right room. There's all kinds of opportunities. This is our organization, so I look forward to you bringing them forward, and please look at our website to find ways to get involved, and please ask, because there's a lot of work to do. So now I'd like to transition into my obligatory thank yous. I'd like to thank everybody that gave me a job in surgery. John Tarpley on the left there let me in the door at Vanderbilt, which I firmly believe was the best residency program in the country at the time. I was a very underdog kind of candidate there. I had an argument with one of the people who interviewed me during my interview, and remember driving home telling him that there's no way we're coming to Nashville, and it turned out that was Will Chapman, who interviewed me, was my advocate. To Kim Hansen, who arranged for me to get a master's degree and trained me to do a lot of the stuff I do in the operating room and hired me as a fellow. To Elliot Chaikoff, who recruited me to my first faculty job and then promptly left about 8 months later for another job. And, that was a hard time after he left. I don't know if I'd still be in Atlanta right now if he had stayed. But I'll also say, in retrospect, I did a lot of growing up during that time and weathering the uncertainty and the upheaval that goes with a leadership turnover. You learn a lot about yourself. To Matt Edwards, who has always been a mentor and recruited me back to Wake Forest, and it was made it very, very hard to leave with the wonderful opportunity that got thrown in front of me. And to Tom Wakefield for giving me my job now, which is such a wonderful one. I'd also like to thank the faculty in my section and in my department. When I look up and down the hall at Michigan, it's just really intimidating how accomplished all of you are. Some of these people are operating at the CVC right now at UM, so I can be here doing this talk to you. And I appreciate all the ways that you push me to be better, and I'm proud to be associated with you. It's remarkable to me still that I'm at the University of Michigan. This is my locker on the left next to Dr. Wakefield's locker, and that used to be Jim Stanley's locker, and when I got there, he cleaned his locker out for me, which the mentality of that, having a giant in surgery give you his locker, really was hard for me to kind of believe. And I really am proud to be a part of our group and proud to be associated with you. I'd also like to thank our nurses in the OR. They often don't get acknowledged, and they're every bit as important as the surgeons. It's a team sport. Same thing goes for our residents and fellows. There's no way we could do all the stuff we do without these folks by our sides, and they don't get enough credit usually. So thanks to all our nurses, residents, fellows for pushing us and helping us and making us get better. I really get inspired when I see light bulbs going off over folks' heads when fellows and medical students gain independence and make me proud, not just with what they say at the podium, but what they do with the mask on and the headlight on. So thank you. Having people around us, is so important to have support like that. If you ever have a tough day like this in the OR, it's really good to be surrounded by a bunch of people that pick each other up and help you get back on the horse, because this job is tough, even when everybody's pulling in the same direction. I'd like to thank my parents. None of us would be here without our parents. My dad grew up the child of an academic. His father was a Romance language professor. He was a PhD. And growing up, I used to love hearing all these stories from my dad about how they moved all over the country and thought it sounded really neat. And hearing about the experiences he had of what it's like to be the new kid in school a bunch of different times. And I think I used to envy that experience because I didn't grow up that way. And I find it ironic now that my family and my kids are enjoying those experiences. And I know it's challenging at times, but I hope they're getting the same benefits because I think it really helped you as a person. That's my mom on the right. She died young while I was in residency. You can see there, that photo was taken before I was born. She was a nurse in the emergency room. And I was going to put one in of the two of us, but I think we've seen enough old photos of me today. My mom really was involved in my interest initially to be a doctor. I used to love hearing the stories when she'd come home from the emergency department about what was going on, and she really used to turn my doctor visits to the pediatrician into little field trips. And I think she would have really enjoyed seeing this, and I hope she's watching. And then to my family. Thanks for being willing to shuck and jive with all these moves. Thanks for not hating me for going after opportunity when the door knocked. Thanks for embracing the Wolverine culture, which I agree, we don't exactly fit in a lot of ways, although we're getting there. I do get asked a lot in the operating room and in the clinic where I'm from. And I really appreciate the enthusiasm with which you embrace all the change that's come with my job. And I don't know how we got here without you hating me for it, but I'm grateful for it. And I do think, it's fun to go to meetings like this and remind ourselves of all the good stuff that goes with this job when it's sometimes easy to focus on the bad stuff. And then to my wife, Amy, this is a picture of her cross-country skiing. Amy tore her ACL in 2006 at this meeting when I was a chief resident. And she's the toughest person I know, although she won't do downhill anymore. Amy, thanks for just being generally awesome. Thanks for prioritizing substance over stuff. Thanks for having a forgiving attitude about the stresses of my job. Thanks for supporting me to do the right thing when it was maybe not going to get rewarded, at least right away. And thanks for being such a smiling and cheerful person who's capable of making me pay attention to the beauty in the world and pull me out of my funk. Sometimes I really need that. That's me on the left. That mask was a gift from one of my former fellows. I love you, Amy. I'm really honored to be your husband. I think these kids, I'm really looking forward to what they're going to do and really proud of what they've already done. And I publicly acknowledge that you deserve damn near all the credit for that. So I love you and I appreciate you. Amy's at home with our youngest, Audrey, right now, who had a final exam and stayed back to be with her. So your dedication is really appreciated. So now we'll transition. For those of you who haven't seen a VESS presidential address before, They're usually supposed to be sort of lighthearted and not necessarily on a medical topic. And I've got another newsletter here. This is the first one I wrote as president, and this is the spring. And this starts off, 2020 is off to a great start for VESS. Boy, did I not know what was coming. Boy, does that seem like a lack of vision now. So sorry about that. When we were on the way back from this meeting, we had no idea what was coming. And suddenly our meeting started looking like this. And suddenly I found, usually the VESS Executive Council meeting happens, every month or every other month. And it started happening 2 or 3 times a week. And I found that we were actually having meetings about whether we were going to have a meeting or whether the SVS was going to have their meeting. And if they didn't have their meeting, should we have our meeting? And it got really, really meta quickly. And we started being ambushed and just subterfuged with this endless set of meeting requests at the same time that many of us were walled out of the OR and had no idea. So I think I became sensitized to this issue and really was thinking about meetings a lot this year. I do bullet journaling just to tell you what a big dork I am. And this thing on the bottom of my weekly calendar here, I usually, this is 3 years ago, I set a New Year's resolution that I haven't kept yet, that I would limit myself to 4 hours of meetings per week because I'm usually not getting work done in a meeting. You can see here I failed, and it just seems like now I don't have enough. I have to move that whole bar graph over on the page because we're having so many meetings. So I'm a bit of a meeting connoisseur. I am very happy to provide feedback when we have a bad meeting or try to think how it could be better. And I really also found myself missing all these little interpersonal interactions that we have when we're not remote, when we're not meeting by Zoom. These little pop-in experiences where I walk down the hall and bump into my partners, and you never know where they'll go. You never know what they'll learn about you and vice versa. And I think with these virtual meetings, the things that I miss the most is not the great science, which we can all share, but oftentimes the best thing about going to a meeting is the stuff that happens out in the hallway, the stuff that happens over dinner that night. And that's where we really, really are missing out, in my opinion, over the past year. When you're having a Zoom meeting in your office, people know you're in there. You get paged, you get your door knocked on, you get interrupted, and you really can't mentally disconnect and really get into that environment you need to be where you're paying attention and engaged because you're sort of under constant threat. In putting my talk together and pulling a bunch of these photos, I was looking at the location feature on my Mac, where it'll show you your photos based on where they were taken. And I was really thinking to myself about all the different places I've been because of my career and going to a meeting there. And a lot of these are places I've been for the first time through VESS. I would have never gone skiing. I would have never come to Sun Valley probably without this. So it's the middle of the winter and it's the COVID pandemic. Why would anybody want to come to a meeting? Some people are asking, are virtual meetings going to replace our in-person meetings? Are we done with this? And I really hope the answer to that's no, and I hope some of what I show you is why. So the title of my talk is Meetingology, which I made up, and I wanted to just review in a fun way the art and science of meetings. And just to be clear for all of you who are hackers out there, there's apparently a thing in Ubuntu, which is a computer software program called Meetingology that's a meeting management program. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not sure I understand it, but I really wanted to talk about why do we meet? Why do we love some meetings and hate others? How can you have a good meeting? To understand that, you need to know how to have a bad meeting, and how can we make our meetings better? So what is a meeting? In this book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, it's the conscious bringing together of people for a reason. And it seems kind of stupid to say, well, why would you meet with no reason? But, this is a coffee cup that I gave my business administrator as a gift after a really terrible meeting. And it says, a chaotic situation, often one that involves several people, each with a different agenda, vision, perception of what's actually going on, in a situation that is very difficult, despite energy and efforts, to instill any sense of order into. And you might think that this is a faculty meeting mug, but this is actually the Urban Dictionary coffee mug for the term goat rodeo, which I introduced to the University of Michigan as parlance for a bad meeting. She regifted me this with this coffee cup. And how many meetings do we go to where we say, why are we here? This could have been an email. What are we doing? I'd now like to share a video that I keep on my phone, and I frequently text this to Don Coleman when we're sitting in a bad meeting because it kind of summarizes a meeting out of control. Really this is a porta potty getting sucked up in the air and losing its contents over the crowd gathered there. And if you were here with us today, I'd have a show of hands, and I bet you could tell me you've been in a few meetings like that. So there's a growing angst about stopping the meeting madness, why your meetings stink and what we got to do about it. And I get memes like this from my colleagues because I'm so keyed in that I frequently am just focused on what's going bad and not what we're there to do. So in this book by Dr. Rogelberg, there's 55 million meetings a year, and this is before COVID. Managers attend an average of 12 meetings a week. We spend about $1.4 trillion a year on this in the U.S., and that doesn't include Zoom costs. And it also doesn't include indirect costs, and those are opportunity costs. If you're in a meeting, you can't be doing something productive somewhere else. And it's also got, I think, really important psychological costs. It erodes our engagement, it makes us frustrated, it drains our spirit, and we spend time ruminating and griping about meetings. There's a term that I think I can relate to called meeting recovery syndrome. It's time you spend winding down after a frustrating meeting. And if you've ever had a meeting, you know, it's a thing sometimes where we have a faculty meeting and then we break up and people gather after the meeting in various offices, usually mine, to complain about the meeting and what were we talking about, and I can't believe we didn't get to this. And it really affects the attendees and those around them. So what are we doing wrong? Here's the ways to have a bad meeting. We need goals that are not clearly defined. The attendees don't provide input on the agenda. Maybe there is no agenda. The people who need to be there either didn't come or weren't invited. Too many people were there. People who didn't need to be there showed up. It started late, it ended late, or there were bad interpersonal dynamics. There's all different kinds of meetings. And the last two bullet points there are my least favorite. A brainstorming meeting tends to last too long and is hard to shut down. And a status meeting for announcements or updates could just be shared elsewhere. So things to think about when you're planning a meeting: decide why you're getting together, who's the host, who's the guest, and where will you meet. Turns out the size of the group matters. 6 or fewer people is a good size for intimate sharing discussion. It's not ideal for diversity of participants or ideas, and it can't bear much dead weight. The people who show up have to really get engaged. Between 12 and 15 people, you get diversity of opinion. There's a thing called constructive unfamiliarity, where the people may not know each other all that well, and there's a curiosity that makes the meeting better. There is a limit, though, of about 12 people. Once you get outside of that number, it's hard to get them around the same table. 30 people is too big for a single conversation to go on, so it can turn into a bunch of meetings happening simultaneously. Interestingly, when you think about the size of VESS versus some of the other big societies, 100 to 150 people, according to anthropologists, is the natural size of a tribe. And there's this thing called Denson's number, is 150, the number of stable friendships that humans can maintain. And I think one of the things that makes our meeting so great is you can actually know almost all the people here most years. The venue is incredibly important and affects how we behave. We tend to act formally when we're in a boardroom. We bring out other sides of ourselves in casual places. So where the meeting is actually determines which you gets to show up there. So you need to pick a venue that embodies your reason for convening. And when you look at our behavior at VESS, we let our hair down, we relax, we smile. We get to see people with their families, and we get to see our kids with their kids, and our spouses interact with their spouses. And we really start blending the faculty, resident, student. The lines get blurred, and I think that's a wonderful thing, and we get to just help each other up and help each other down, and I think that's a real thing we're missing with the Zoom format. This is Danielle Zutzko on the far right. She's one of our former residents and is now a faculty member at UAB, skiing with me and my daughter Olivia, and she broke off and went skiing with my daughter the rest of the day. She understands me differently now from being at that meeting and probably learned some stuff I wouldn't tell her. Hosting matters too. You need to commit to authenticity, set a purpose, direction, and ground rules, and you also have to enforce. A chill host is an opportunity for someone to take the agenda over or dominate it. People start griping when the guests feel like they're poorly governed and unprotected by the host. And this quote I love by Isaiah Berlin from Parker's book, "Freedom for the wolves has often led to the demise of the sheep." So there's a real merit to someone who's comfortable with enough conflict to shut someone down when they're being dominant, controlling the conversation, not giving everybody a chance to talk. We need to lead with generous authority when we're hosting a meeting. What is generous authority? You need to be imposing in a way that serves the guests. We need to spare them from chaos, spare them from being anxious, not let some guests get dominated by others, and ward off attempts to hijack the purpose or the agenda. And a great example in Parker's book is think of how a heckler gets dealt with effectively at a comedy club, shutting people down. This is an interesting meeting format. This is our department chair, Justin Dimmick. He likes to have walking meetings. Instead of doing Zoom, we actually meet up and walk all over the hospital together. I think this is really interesting, but he defines the context of that meeting and doing it. The first time it was a little weird to me. I now know I'm not going to be able to take notes. Maybe that's an advantage for him. But I do think in the Zoom era, we need to think of ways to force this contact even if we can't sit in a room. There's a thing called the 90% rule. 90% of what makes a gathering successful takes place beforehand. You should make an agenda. You should launch your meeting intentionally. Open it with a clear signal. If you've ever had a meeting that starts by people dwindling in and they all start talking, and now you're 5 or 10 minutes past the start point and it hasn't begun yet, it really kills it for you. You should also not let the clock determine your agenda. And if an agenda item is proposed that doesn't fit, you need to either move it to another meeting, handle it outside of a meeting, but you cannot and should not pretend you didn't get the suggestion. Most meetings are an hour long, and this book by Rogelberg suggests that that's primarily because it's the default in Microsoft Outlook. He recommends considering a meeting for 48 minutes or even a 15-minute meeting, which is called a super speedy meeting. Shortening the format gives people time to go to whatever they're doing next, and it puts a healthy pressure on everybody to make good use of it. There's also a discussion in this book I found interesting about penalties for going over time, either through physical exercise like push-ups. I got threatened with physical penalties on our executive committee meeting this year, or a beer money jar. This little screenshot on the right there, within Google Calendars, Google brought a lot of this forward. You can tick something called speedy meetings in there, and it shortens all your meetings to be short of an hour or short of a half hour automatically. And for those of us, if you have people who show up late because they know the meeting's going to take forever to get going, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And extending a meeting the next time just to fill the time is a bad habit. The order matters too. Think of the agenda as an event plan. Don't use it as a crutch. You should always, always, always start with the most important thing and save announcements for the end as a last call. You should also try to be present. Boring meetings are a symptom of a problem. If you're leading a meeting and people are texting or on their phones, think about what you're doing wrong because you failed to get them engaged. Sometimes breaking the usual etiquette is helpful too. Usual etiquette sustains underlying norms. For example, if we always start with announcements and you don't need to be there because they're also on the agenda, it sort of activates everybody to show up late because you don't need to be there. So think about disrupting things like that. I think another beautiful thing about an in-person meeting like VESS or like a society meeting that we're really suffering from is there's no coming and going from VESS. You might pop into or out of the exhibit hall or the meeting hall, but while I'm here at VESS, my pager's off. Nobody's going to come get me with an emergency I have to leave for. And it really allows me to kind of get into a different state of mind and focus and think and relax a little bit. And in our world of vascular surgery, where we get unanticipated emergencies dropped on us left and right, on call or not, there's a real value in the break that comes from leaving town and being unavailable and making your brain available to think deeply. I think it's also helpful in terms of presence to prime your guests to be present. You can do that through your invitation, and it's really important that the meeting actually technically starts before it starts, because once you send the agenda, people begin conceptualizing what's going to go on and what their role will be. So you can take advantage of that through your invitation to share. You can also prime people to be present by giving them tasks and things to think about or present ahead of time. It's also good to encourage good controversy in a meeting, and I think some of our most unhealthy meetings are related to unhealthy silence. So what is good controversy? I didn't put the credit here, but this is from from Priya Parker's book. Good controversy is a kind of contention where people are forced to look more closely at what they care about, when there's danger, but there's also benefit in doing so. It helps us re-examine what we hold dear. It leads us to something better than the status quo and helps us grow, even though it can be a little uncomfortable during the meeting. I also think it's important to assess meeting quality. We need to constantly be troubleshooting what we could do differently or better. You can look back at what we're doing wrong slide. And it's important to get feedback. If you're running a meeting and you get feedback from an attendee about what you could do better or what was great, you really need to pay attention to that if you want to be successful. This is another cartoon that I love, in that these guys are uncomfortable actually making a decision because they've only taken a half hour. So that's sort of the ethos of what I was just showing. And this is supposed to be my cue to start winding up. For this one, they took all the oxygen out of the room to keep people from finishing on time. And it says on the bottom, you can see everybody's passing out. And this was actually a 48-minute meeting. So here's my top 10 tips for having a good meeting. Decide why you're gathering, and if there's not a good reason, cancel the meeting. Thoughtfully exclude people who do not need to be there. It'll up the ante for those that are there, and they'll really understand that they're not there for no reason at all. The environment should serve the purpose. I think one of the great things about VESS is we go to all these places that people want to get to and come back to, and that's certainly the case for me. And looking at our scientific presentations over and over and over again, I can tell everybody's itching to get back on the mountain, itching to see each other on the fireside, itching for those interactions that we just don't get through hearing the abstracts. Close the doors. That's sort of related to being present, but that has the idea of no coming and going. Host with generous authority. Be present. Make an agenda with the most important thing first. Encourage good controversy. Actively manage your time, and do a quality assessment every so often. So I'm going to wrap up with an illustrative skiing story that may sound like it's made up, but it's actually true. This is a picture of me and my son George when we came to this meeting in Park City the year I became a counselor for the VESS, which was one of the biggest honors of my professional career, and I think will remain so. And the last day we were there, we went up on the mountain, and there's the concept of the last run of the trip. It's a thing at this meeting, you know. It's a last chance to ski down and think about when we're going to come back. And this year has taught us that you can't always take it for granted that you are coming back. So me and George decided to do one more run. And as I've previously shown you, I am not a gifted skier. I own that. I skied backwards accidentally about 100 yards down the mountain yesterday. It was very scary. We got up on the mountain, and we had looked at the trail map, and there was a route to get down. George was a brand new skier at that time. We had access to a green, and when we got to it, about halfway down, it was closed. And the only way down the rest of the mountain was down a double black. And I don't do single black diamonds. And the visibility was poor, and the snow was coming down like crazy. And we looked at each other and said, you know what, we've got to find a way to get down this hill. And we literally almost sat on our skis and just baby stepped it down. And you know what? We overcame that challenge and got down the mountain together. And we talk about that every time we come back and go skiing together. So I'm really glad at least George was able to come out for this. And there's several other analogies like that on the mountain that certainly reflect and correlate with things we see in the world of academic surgery. There's always hazards out there that may not be marked, so you really have to be paying attention all the time and have a plan A and a plan B and be prepared to get into trouble and get out of it, because you're gonna. You need to be familiar with the routes and choose your path appropriately. This really applies in so many different ways, and I think about junior surgery faculty. You know, if your first year on the faculty, if you can't identify a tough case as a black diamond and get help, you're going to have a problem. So think about when you're going to be in hot water and if you're up to the task as a surgeon, and if you're not, get help. The danger of the avalanche comes in many ways, whether it's Zoom requests, pages, or opportunities. And we have to protect ourselves sometimes from our motivation and try to remember that you can't do everything, and you'll get yourself aggravated trying. So with that, I'd like to say I'm really looking forward to the next time we can all get together in the same room in this format for a VESS meeting. And I think it's going to be special in a way that it hasn't been before, because we've all been missing it so much. And I really hope, I know I've had optimism in all of our newsletters this year that has maybe been, in retrospect, sounds kind of foolish, but I really think the coming year, there's all kinds of cause for optimism and enthusiasm and hope. I'm standing here vaccinated against COVID. I'm appreciating being alive and above ground, and I really think we're standing at the top of the mountain looking down, and I really look forward to taking that last run with you next year. So thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be your society president, and I look forward to ongoing growth and success. This organization is just absolutely wonderful, and if you join, if you're not familiar with us, you'll learn to make it your favorite quickly. So thank you very much, and have a great day.